What's up, everybody? Welcome to Overcoming Average, sponsored by Atlas Technology Solutions. So check us out, Apple certified managed service provider here in Charlotte. We'll take care of all your IT needs. So I want to get right to it today. Have my friend Robert Mariani. I asked you just a second ago how I pronounce your name, but tell me if I'm doing it right. Is it?
That's perfectly fine. You got
Okay.
it. You got it.
So I want to give us a history, give the people that are listening a history of how we know each other. It's sort of interesting. We've got ties through church. We've got ties through work, creative stuff. Gosh, we've got a long history as I started thinking about it. But I wanted to go back and kind of, again, give you an opportunity to tell your story. I think we've talked 3 or 4 times in the past week or so. And, I was thinking about having you come on as soon as you told me your story. I saw it on Facebook, and just to get to the point, you've dealt with the coronavirus, and I thought, I cannot believe that somebody that I know has dealt with this. So out of concern, I obviously was like, I got to call Robert and find out how he's doing. But I wanted to go back and give everybody kind of a picture of the circumstances that led up to your current situation. So you've been battling cancer for 9 years. Is that right?
I got diagnosed in 2011. And so really, we're almost coming up on 12 years.
Wow.
But, yeah.
So let's start with that. What led up to that? What made you go to the doctor? How did that come about?
So at the time, had a dog. I was also married at that time. And actually, I would say 3 months after I'd gotten married is when issues started popping up with my health. I would take a dog for a walk, and I would come back pretty tired. And as time went on, in a very short amount of time, I would take the dog for a 10-minute walk. I'd come back and take an hour and a half, 3-hour nap.
Really?
Yeah. And I thought that was, pretty unusual. In general, I've stayed pretty fit most of my life. And so, a 10-minute walk typically, just didn't bother me at all. Then one day during that period, I was taking a shower, reached up at my right neck. I was washing it, and I just felt this bump right here. And it was crazy. I kind of knew what that was right away.
Really?
I knew that was a lymph node, and I knew I shouldn't be feeling it. So went and saw my primary care physician and had the first exam. And he, like most doctors, they ask you, what are you feeling, how are you feeling, symptoms, so on and so forth. But the moment he felt my neck and he put his hands on both sides of my neck, and he started feeling, and he felt the lymph node right away. And the way he asked me, I knew that my presumption was correct, that was abnormal. He definitely was concerned. He asked how long I had it, and he set up a series of a battery of tests right away. And the very first thing I had done was a biopsy in that lymph node. And I should have known at the results of what happened that day that this was kind of going to be my path through chasing the cancer. And what happened the day that I had that procedure, essentially they do what's called an aspirate. And they take a very long needle while you're awake, no numbing or anything, and they kind of try to find the lymph node. And the first time the doctor did it, it bounced me off his chair that I was sitting on. I was like, whoa, that, we can't be doing that. That was too painful. And he said, okay, let's calm down, wait a couple minutes. We have two options. We could do it surgically, or we can try this again. And I really didn't want to go have surgery for a biopsy. Yeah. So he did the second one, and I heard sounds in my head that sounded like the needle scraping on bone. I mean, it was pretty terrible, and it was not comfortable at all. And he got his sample that he needed, and then I had to go sit down in another chair to relax. I was really feeling nauseous at that point. By the time I got up from his chair and started walking out of his office, his nurse was right behind me, and I collapsed in the hallway. Now, his office happened to be connected to the hospital that we were near, and they got me on a wheelchair, and they literally ran me over to the ER. And on TV where you see, it's very dramatic, 20 doctors come rushing in, or 10 doctors and nurses and so forth. When they put me down on the table and they saw how I was reacting, that's exactly what happened. My throat was closing up. I couldn't breathe. And I had a swarm of people on me, and I was really kind of panicking at that point. They were trying to get Benadryl in me as quickly as possible, and they finally got me too. It took a couple hours to settle everything down. And ultimately, out of all of that, I still ended up needing surgery for the biopsy because they didn't get the sample that they wanted. So that was kind of the beginning of my journey. It took to actually get a diagnosis of the cancer, a full diagnosis. It took almost, we started in July. We didn't have a full diagnosis till September.
Really?
Yeah, because at that time, you get a test, they get the results, then they say, okay, now that we see that, we want to do test ABC behind that. And it was late in September, sitting in my living room. I'll never forget this. It was about 8:30 at night, and phone rings, and it's a representative from the doctor's office. I think it was a relatively inexperienced nurse. She called me up to tell me I had cancer. And I had 20 questions for her when she asked me, and she couldn't answer a single question, which was like the absolute wrong way to deliver news to a patient. It was late at night, couldn't get any answers. She said, you could talk to the doctor. So this is a Thursday night. Doctor will be back in the office on a Monday. So I had to wait the whole weekend. Yeah. I'm losing my mind trying to figure out what this really meant. So that triggered a bunch of other tests because there was something in that final diagnosis that caused the oncologist to request what's called a bone marrow biopsy. So a bone marrow biopsy, essentially, you lay down on a bed, you're awake, and you've got one person kind of holding your legs down.
Oh, man.
And you've got another person, essentially, they drill into the back of your hip bone at the top of it. Yeah. And they essentially extract samples from your bone marrow. And it's a fairly painful procedure, but what they learned specifically from that bone marrow diagnosis or sample was they moved me from a particular type of lymphoma, and they specifically named it what's called Waldenstrom's macroglobulinemia. It's a mouthful.
Wow.
So, the fact that they were so specific about it, I was kind of encouraged because I thought, well, okay, you know exactly what it is, you know how to treat it. And I remember sitting in the doctor's office that day when she gave me the revised diagnosis, and she pretty much told me, we think we could get you 3 to 5 years. Oof. So that was the current state of technology or medicine. So after the shock kind of wore off in the office that day, I asked her, would you advise me to get a second opinion? And she was really good about that. This was up at Wake Forest Baptist Hospital, and they sent me to Duke University. There was a specialist there that I was supposed to see, and he had another appointment that apparently was more pressing than mine. And he sent in his wife, who was also a specialist, but in myeloma. And she read through my report from Wake Forest and essentially agreed with the protocol that they were suggesting for treatment. But as we were finishing up the conversation, she asked me in her very thick Roman accent. She was from Italy. Ironically, being that I was Italian, she said, "Have you ever heard of Dr. Trian at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute?" And I said, "No, I would have never crossed that path."
Right.
And she said, "Well, he's one of the world's leading researchers on Waldenstrom's." And truthfully, I didn't write down his name. I didn't put it in my phone.
Right.
I didn't think anything of it because she agreed both with the diagnosis and the treatment protocol. And so went home from there and started setting up chemo, the regiment, which was starting in October. And essentially, not all, but most chemo regimens tend to be, you do 1 week of chemo, you take 3 weeks to recover from that batch of chemo, and theoretically you get strong enough again to get hit with it again. This is typical in blood cancers. And so we started in October and finished up, I think it was, October, December, November, December, January, February. Yeah, March of 2012. I was really beat up. I couldn't work the whole time. It really shattered me. I lost a lot of weight. Just didn't feel great. But I would say within about a month after that, I started to recover. And then fully recovering from the chemo took about 3 months, which put me in the middle of summer. And all of a sudden I was getting my energy back. I was feeling really, really good. And that lasted through the beginning of fall. And I had to go back to Chicago for a wedding. That's where I'm from. And I knew I wasn't feeling good when I got there, but I wasn't really sure what it was. So that was in November. Another month went by, and I was starting to feel fatigued again. The same kind where I would walk the dog, and I'd be feeling really worn out. So I went and saw my local oncologist, now in Charlotte, and we did a bunch of blood draws, and I got a really scary message at that time is my numbers had taken a dive. Even though I had just gone through chemo, I was in bad shape. The cancer really pushed back hard. So he said to me, I remember distinctively, he's like, we need to get you in treatment right away. I don't know what happened, but I remember Dr. Trian's name in December. And I reached out to him via email. First, I Googled him to even find out how to find his email and so forth. And remarkably, when I reached out to him, in a couple of days, he got back to me and he asked me to have my case sent to him from here in Charlotte. He didn't guarantee seeing me.
Yeah.
When he got my case, he responded really quickly and he said, we need to see you right away.
So you had to seek him out. It wasn't that they suggested you go see him as the specialist, or was it just the verbal from the one lady that just said you should check this out? But it was on you eventually essentially to reach out to him, right?
Well, so I have a tendency when I don't hear what I like that I'm hearing, that I go digging further for other help or information or whatnot.
Sure.
And the last thing I wanted to do was go through chemo after just going through it for 6 months and only getting barely 6 months of result from it.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, thankfully, really, by the grace of God, I remember her name. It was Dr. Gasparetto. And thankfully, she mentioned Dr. Trian's name. So I didn't get to see him till April of 2013. And I was still married at the time, and my wife was with me. And that day, he looked at my case, and he wanted to do some X-rays and a CAT scan right away, based on my case. We got back. This was supposed to be a one-day consultation. Got the CAT scan back, and he's like, we need to get you into surgery. And that surprised me. And he told me we need to, I have what's called a pleural effusion. And essentially, that's a buildup of fluid in your lung or in your lung cavity. And we need to get it out right away. When they did the X-ray, what they noticed is almost my entire lung cavity was filled up. And he's like, are you having trouble breathing? And I don't know. I just didn't notice it for some reason. Wow. So they did the procedure, and they can only take out of anyone at one time 1.5 liters of fluid. Now, you could see my torso here. Yeah. Imagine almost a 2-liter bottle coming out of me. And that was because the cancer was causing a problem with my lungs, which was causing all sorts of fluid buildup and so forth. And he knew exactly why it was happening. I had 3 of those procedures previously in Charlotte. Unfortunately, the doctors here all thought that there was nothing you could do about it. You got to just keep having these on a regular basis. Wow. Well, he knew exactly what was going on with it, and he explained it to me. So then he said, okay, here's the regimen of chemo that I would recommend to you. It was a different regimen. He said, I know for sure it'll work. What I don't know is how long it'll last. And then he said, and by the way, we have 2 slots open on a FDA drug or trial drug that we're testing for FDA approval, specifically for your disease. And he told me the ups and downs of it, or all the pros and cons of it. And he said, we are seeing really good results with it. He said, I don't want you to make a decision here today. He knew we were going to stay overnight. So he said, go discuss it and we'll talk tomorrow and you can let me know if you're interested or not. At that point, I thought, well, I really don't want to go into chemo again. And given that he's already telling me I don't know how long it's going to last, I just didn't have interest in doing that. But ultimately, a decision came out of prayer. I just prayed that night, and I asked God to grant me wisdom on what way to go. And I heard, go with the trial drug. So they set us up with the medication, and it had to come specifically from them. It could not be received from any pharmacy because it's an FDA trial. They have to handle everything.
Okay.
So
what's the name of the drug? Do you know?
It's the trade name now is called Imbruvica. At the time, while it was under trial, it was called Ibrutinib, which is very common. They give it a name during trial, and then when it goes commercial, they change the name. So within 30 days of taking the drug, my health turned around. I remember on a relatively crisp day in the spring in Charlotte, and I was pulling out the power washer to clean gutters and stuff, and my wife came out and I think was both happy but concerned that I'm up on a ladder, power washing, and I'm still somewhat frail from the cancer, but I felt like $1 million. Then something happened with the drug that no one was expecting, and some significant joint pain started happening, first in my left foot and ankle, then in my right foot and ankle. Now, during the first year of the trial, I had to be in Boston every 30 days. So after being using the drug for 30 days, went back to Boston and saw my doctor, and I said, I've got a problem. I've got this significant joint pain. And at the time, the drug was still really pretty new to them as well. And I'll never forget his response. Well, we just haven't seen that in anyone else. And
not what you want to hear necessarily.
Not only not what I wanted to hear, but my response was, so what does that mean? Just because you're not seeing it anywhere else, this is a new drug. It's happening to me, and it's getting worse and worse. I mean, so you're about 10 feet from me. By the end of 30 days, I could barely walk 10 feet. The pain was so significant. I would just sit on the couch all day long, and I couldn't go up my stairs at my house. It was brutal. So over a period of about 5 months, they kept sending me to different doctors trying to figure out what was going on, because they didn't think it was the drug initially. I went to be checked for arthritis. I had nerves checked. I mean, I saw every kind of doctor possible. And finally they said, okay, we're going to back down the dosage of the drug. So at first they took me to 2/3 dose. That seemed to help a little, but not enough. And then finally they got me down to 1/3 dose, and they said, that's it. If this doesn't work, we have to take you off this drug. I would say about 30 days after they got me on 1/3 dose, the pain started to go away finally. in between that time, I had seen, or about 30 days, just as they brought me to 1/3 dose, I saw another specialist. It's called an orthopedic oncologist. And they had x-rays of my legs. And the guy pulled out the x-rays, looking at it, and very matter of fact said, "Oh, you've got bone infarcts." And in my mind, the way he said it so matter of fact, he was going to write a script and I'm good to go. So I said, "What do we do now?" He said, "Well, there's nothing we can do." I said, "Well, what does that mean?" He goes, "Well, essentially your bone is dying. And one of two things is going to happen. It's either going to heal itself, or if it continues up toward your knees, there's only one option." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And he goes, "We'd have to amputate your legs."
Oh, nice.
I remember getting home that day really mad at God. I was like, really? The cancer wasn't enough? We had to try this new uncurable disease. By the way, I don't think I mentioned this or not, but Waldenstrom's macroglobulinemia is incurable. You can only treat it. It's called an indolent cancer. And what that means is it moves relatively, or it progresses relatively slowly through your body, but it goes through your whole body because it's a blood cancer. And, you know, at that point, when I heard that other diagnosis, I was pretty upset. Yeah. Again, at the time, while I was married, my wife prayed for me constantly. Other people prayed for me constantly. And once we got to 1/3 dose, the pain slowly subsided and life started to become more normal again.
So at this point, was the drug helping you feel better as far as the cancer at 1/3 dose, but also were your bones beginning to heal at that point? Was it feeling better, or was it just the pain was gone?
The pain was subsiding. Now, I've never had those same bones x-rayed again, or an MRI. But the way they explained it to me is if they heal themselves, the problem clears up and you won't feel the pain anymore. So given that I didn't feel the pain anymore, I presumed it had cleared up completely.
Yeah.
So that had cleared up by the end of 2013. So from 2013 on to about 2017, so 4 years, slowly but surely, the marker that identifies the disease in my blood, the number of it in parts per milliliter, kept reducing slowly but surely, never getting anywhere near normal what it would be in your body or any normal person's body, but enough so that I could tolerate the cancer. I would still always have days of random fatigue, or I would still have some symptoms that came along with it, but they would get further apart and less frequent. But one of the things they told me about this drug all along is at some point it's going to stop working or diminish the level at which it works. And that time came at about 2017. At that point, I was doing yearly visits instead of month to month. And my numbers just consistently were getting worse and worse. And now I was seeing the doctors quarterly again. Up to, I think it was October of 2019, I had my most startling blood test. And the numbers were really starting to move fast now, much faster than they ever had, in the wrong direction. So I decided to go one more time to Boston in January and of this year, 2020. This was at the end of the month. We got all our numbers back, and they were the worst they'd been in 5 years. And at that point, my oncologist there said, we got to look at a new treatment. This drug that you've been on has lost its effectiveness for you. And frankly, you're one of the people who's been on it the longest. So you've gotten some of the best results out of it, but it's just not working for you anymore.
Yeah.
So he gave me two scenarios. He gave me one that was a chemo scenario, which was actually the same chemo scenario that they were talking about before I started this other drug that I was on, which is a daily pill. Again, same issue. We know this will work.
Yep.
We don't know how long it'll work, but we believe you should get about 3 years out of it before you'll need to do another treatment. Then we have another regimen that is less toxic. It takes longer to go through the process, but we also believe you'll be able to continue working through that process. Neither one of those options sounded great to me. So I told them that I was going to go get a second opinion at Mayo Clinic up in Rochester, Minnesota, where another highly respected physician studies this disease and knows it inside and out. And they agreed with the decision to go there. As a matter of fact, they forwarded all my latest test information to Mayo Clinic. I was not able to go there until March 11th, I think it was, because they just couldn't get me in. So what was going on in March? I was not aware of this, how fast COVID was starting to move through our country. Truthfully, I don't watch much television. I listen to the radio more and watch movies more. But I really kind of was somewhat oblivious to what was going on.
Most people don't watch regular TV anymore. But
So I was fairly oblivious to how quickly this was becoming a problem in the United States. So I was I flew from Charlotte, had to go through O'Hare in Chicago up to Minnesota. My sister-in-law met me in Chicago and went up to Minnesota with me. We got there, checked into our hotel, and the next day we started doing a battery of tests for 2 days in Minnesota. Now, Mayo Clinic is this amazing facility. I mean, it's like a city unto itself. As a matter of fact, there's so many buildings they have on campus that they have underground tunnels to each of the buildings, which they call the subway, but it's foot traffic. Being in Minnesota, you don't want to be walking outside,
That's right.
November to June, probably.
Yeah.
Met the physician there, terrific physician, very professional, just really easy to talk to. And at the end of our couple days of consultation with him, he came to the conclusion that agreed with the same chemo regimen that Boston was pointing me to. So pack up March 13th or 14th, fly back to Charlotte. The day after, no, 2 days after, I had like a little scratchy throat. Didn't think anything of it. 3 or 4 days later, I started really kind of not feeling well. And at that point, I'm thinking it's a cold. A couple days later, now it feels like a flu. And I don't know what I heard, what I saw, but I was paying attention to COVID now.
Yeah. Well, and so give me those dates again. I want to kind of go back. You said that was March.
I think I'm pretty sure I was there March 11th through 13th.
So I started keeping my own sort of, I don't know, personal journal about COVID when it started getting serious. Because I, like you and probably a lot of other people around the world, thought, oh, yeah, some virus in China, it'll never reach here. It's whatever. And we go about our business. But I remember we had some people from our small group over, and I remember it started popping up on YouTube a little bit more. Hey, the president's going to address this. It just started getting a little more serious. And then I believe it was that day I was supposed to go to Texas to do some MAC training on the Sunday, and that Saturday they called and said, "Hey, we're shutting down." So in my journal here that I kept as far as cases, at that point in time, on March 14th is when I began. There were less than 1,000 cases in the United States that we knew about, obviously testing and all that stuff. And at that point, 60 people had died of the virus at that point. So that's your timeline, right? You're right there sort of at, or at least my beginning of kind of waking up to, oh, this is kind of serious. I should start paying attention. So go ahead. So you're back. You're in Charlotte, a couple days in. You're starting to feel sick. And then what happens?
So by the 18th, I got an email from the hospital I'm associated with here. And it said, we're opening drive-through testing for COVID, but you have to be symptomatic and you have to be high risk. They just really didn't have the capacity to test a lot of people at that time. Right. That was on the 18th of March.
Well, in which, looking at those dates, at that point, just in those few days, we went from less than 1,000 to, on the 18th, it was 7,339 known cases and 116 deaths. Wow. It's funny, I wrote that stuff down, but it grew. So you must have been in that next number, the next couple of days.
It took all the way to the 23rd to get a response back on the test. At that time, they just weren't set up for quick responses. And what I realize now is that was really instrumental in how bad I had gotten because I wasn't getting care.
So it took 5 days?
Yeah.
5 days to get a response. What was the exam like? Or the test? At
the time, it was literally a swab in my throat. Okay. And I had to sit in my car. The person walked up to the car, they put the swab in there. They check your oxygen. They're checking heart rate, all that stuff. At the time, apparently, my oxygen was okay. Heart rate was okay. But I had a fever when I went there. And so, yeah, it took all the way till the 23rd to get the results. And I got a phone call late in the afternoon. And I was not feeling well when I got that phone call. And they told me about it, and they said, you have to start quarantining yourself right now for 14 days. I said, okay. Went to bed that night, not feeling well. By about 1 a.m., I woke up and I was sweating. I had I think it was 103 or 104 degree fever.
Oh my gosh.
And I felt miserable, and I got very concerned. I took some aspirin, tried to get back to sleep. I think I woke up about 6 a.m., really feeling miserable. Checked my fever, it had not come down, and I was having trouble breathing. So I now am not married, and so I had no one there to help me, and I just went into survival mode. I packed a small suitcase, and I called 911 to get an ambulance. And when I told them that I'd been tested positive, they sent an ambulance where the crew was all in, protective gear, masks, gloves, everything. And they got me in the ambulance. They started checking my oxygen level, and they knew I was in trouble. They gave me oxygen right away. And we rode from the house all the way downtown to the hospital I got checked into. They rolled me into emergency room, did a quick check on me. It took about a half hour. They would not give me food, drink, anything because until the doctor authorized what the next step is, they wouldn't do anything. And so the authorization they got was to put me in ICU immediately. So I still was not aware of how bad a shape I was in at that time. They were pumping a lot of oxygen into me to get me breathing. I remember being in the ICU for about an hour after the nurses checked me out and told me they'd be helping me and taking care of me, and then they just disappeared. What I didn't realize is the hospital was all the ICU rooms had other COVID patients in it. That's the only thing that was in the ICU. And there were about 9 of them at the time when I was there. And a doctor walks in, and he walks in with the tubes for a ventilator. And he said, we want to put you on this. You need this. And what little I knew about the ventilator at that time was, you're in trouble if they're putting you on one of these. And I, as much trouble as I was having breathing and the fever and so forth, I just didn't feel like I was at a critical state to need that.
Right.
They kept me in the ICU for a total of 3 days. On the second day, they came in and told me again they want to put me on the ventilator. I said, I'm not prepared to take that step.
So did you feel like you didn't need it at that time? I mean, when you say you had trouble breathing, what is that like? Because, people have said shortness of breath, but what was that to you? What was that experience?
Okay, so as I'm talking to you, I presume you're not hearing me take deep breaths and so forth. When people were talking to me, it's like this. This is how I'm talking. You're just very short, and you can't get enough oxygen in you. And the reason you can't get enough oxygen in you is because what I didn't realize was happening is the pneumonia in my lungs was just devastating my lungs, and the capacity of the lung to hold oxygen and transfer that oxygen to blood was greatly diminished.
So at that point, you have trouble breathing, and do you feel like they were pushing the ventilator on you, or do you think you genuinely needed it?
I think as I was watching, I could see some of the other rooms, and almost all of them, people were on ventilators. So in my mind, those people were really sick.
Right.
I wasn't that sick.
Hmm.
So I don't know. Somehow I convinced myself I wasn't that sick, but that's really not what the doctors were saying. So interestingly, on the third day, they moved me to another floor that they said was ICU, but it was kind of one step down from full-blown ICU. Stayed there a couple days, and they just kept upping my oxygen. Because again, I was getting worse and worse. They had to do an emergency, another one of those procedures that I talked about where they pulled the fluid out of me.
Yeah.
They were really concerned about that because now my lungs are being filled with the pneumonia from the COVID, plus one lung is being compressed from all this fluid that's in the cavity. After they did that procedure, they moved me back down to full-blown ICU. I stayed there a few more days. And again, they kept kind of pushing the ventilator idea, and I just kept saying, no, I'm not going to do it. And truthfully, I think there was a certain point where I go on that thing, I'm not coming off.
Sure.
I think that's really what was going through my mind.
Yeah.
So,
Which is very logical, actually, in these cases, from what I understand. But,
well, sorry to interrupt you, but part of the reason I had that feeling is every time I asked them about, well, what does that mean being put on the ventilator, and what does that look like, and when can I expect to come off?
That's what I was just about to ask you is, what does that mean to go on a ventilator?
They did not want to answer my questions. And what I took away from that was this is a last resort. So as a last-ditch effort before I think they were going to give me one more chance to deny the ventilator, they put me on this, forgive me, I can't remember the technical name for it, but essentially it was a kind of like a high-speed oxygen machine, something that really pushed air into you. I stayed on that a couple days, and I kept getting worse and worse still, even on that. Now I'm back in the kind of second-tier ICU. While in that room one day, this is on a Thursday, 3 doctors marched into my room. One sits right next to my bed and literally says to me, "How are you feeling?" I could barely talk to her. She goes, "You need to make a decision right now about getting on the ventilator. Not tomorrow, right now." I said, "You got to give me at least a day to think about this." She said, "Nope, we can't do that." So she asked me, "Why don't you want to go on the ventilator?" I go, "Because I don't think I'm going to see you afterwards." And she goes, "Well, we have had people come off of it." Not very specific. We've had people come off of it. I go, I need to talk to someone about this. She said, "Well, who do you want to talk to?" I go, "Well, I want to talk to my brother." She goes, "Put him on the phone." She's like, "Put him on speakerphone."
Jeez.
So we got him on the phone. We talked about it. He asked her a lot of questions about the process, and she answered all his questions. And then he asked a question that I didn't think to ask. He said to her, "Would you put him on a ventilator?" Meaning, if it was your decision alone, would you put him on a ventilator? And she actually said no. Well, now I was really confused. You've just walked in with this team telling me I have to make a decision right now. What I came to learn a couple weeks after I came home, the reason she said that is because of all the people who were dying in New York. on the ventilators. So what a lot of people don't realize is the typical duration on the ventilator is about 7 to 13 days if you come off of it alive. And from a percentage standpoint in New York, what was happening was about only 15 to 20% of people were coming off the ventilator and living. So, a significant amount of people were dying on the ventilator. And she knew that.
About what day is this? Do you remember?
So that, you mean date?
Yeah, date. Because I'm just looking back.
Give me a second here. I can go backwards from when I was released. So I was released on April 9th. So that was on April 2nd.
Okay, so on April 2nd, at that point, there were 215,357 cases with 5,113 dead. So just from the time basically where you started feeling bad to then, is almost 250,000 people that have tested positive, and 5,000 people dead. So probably a lot of, oh my gosh, what do we do? This is going to be crazy in the doctors' minds, at least, watching New York, going through what they were going through.
And one thing I was not sensing, I mean, they were very upfront with me about this. Almost any question that I would ask where I'd want a definitive answer on, they would say, we don't know yet. We don't know yet. This is new. We're learning this by the hour in some cases.
Yeah.
So after the phone call with my brother, hung up the phone. At that point, I started signing my will. They brought in the paperwork that my brother had forwarded, and they were rushing me to sign it because they wanted to start this procedure immediately.
What triggered their urgency for you in particular?
My oxygen level kept dropping, and they kept seeing the disease progress in my lungs.
So they had something to go off of that was pushing them.
Yeah.
But did you feel any different, or were you just still feeling terrible generally?
I don't recall like a quick decline.
Sure.
But I did recall with the oxygen thing in my nose that it was getting harder and harder to draw that air in. And they, at that point, up to that point that they had put me on the ventilator, all the experimental drugs you heard about on television, they've thrown everything at me, and nothing was working. So they put me, all I remember, the last things I remember before apparently they put me into the coma, was once I gave them the decision to go on that Thursday, like there were 5 or 6 people in the room, and they're almost in military fashion. They're barking out orders like.
So let's go back for a second. So you were, they had you on, did you take hydroxychloroquine, I guess?
Yeah.
And you were still on a regular oxygen at this point.
Yep.
Now, when you go on a ventilator, and I don't know much about this, even with all the news, they have to put you under to be on a ventilator. Is that right?
Well, yeah, they definitely knock you out. Now, I don't know if they put everyone in a coma, but they put me into a coma. I kind of think they do put everyone into a coma because they don't want you moving at all.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, my wrists and ankles were strapped to the bed.
Wow.
And that's because they don't, if you were to move and say grab the hose and panic and pull it out of you, the amount of damage you would do would.
So you, for lack of a better explanation, it's almost like you're prepping for surgery.
Right.
They tie you down and
yep,
intubate you.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. So they start the process. There's people buzzing around, getting you ready.
And I don't remember the moment I was out, but at some moment I was completely out. Now, at some point, I was waking up. I had no idea how long I'd been out. I really wasn't cognizant of what was going on, except as I was being talked to, as I was coming to, I remember staring at a big monitor in the room and a doctor staring at it. And at some point I recognized I couldn't move because I was all strapped in.
Wow.
That was a little panicky.
Yeah, I can't imagine that.
And then I remember he looked over at me and he asked me if I was okay. I couldn't communicate. I had this thing down my throat. Kind of like when dentists always try to talk to you when they have a million tools in your mouth, right? But this was even worse than that. And he's staring at the screen, and then he looks at me. He goes, "We've brought you back, or we've awakened you from the coma, and we're preparing to remove the ventilator from you, but we have to get authorization to do that." And I presume the authorization is talking to the physicians who handle your lungs specifically.
Yeah.
And they want to make sure everything's okay before they remove this device from you. And now he walks up to the bed and he starts to explain to me the procedure. And it's kind of a two-step procedure. They have one tube down you for breathing and another one for extracting whatever's in your lungs. And he started to remove that portion of the device from me, and it started to go wrong. And I could tell he was panicking a little bit as it was happening, and now I'm starting to panic. And I could tell this wasn't quite the way this should go. And it was horrendous. I won't get graphic about what really happened, but it wasn't fun at all. So you're
awake during this.
I'm awake, yeah. As anyone else is who goes through this.
Yeah.
And then I calmed down. They got me kind of cleaned up and took care of tidying up things a bit. And then they prepared to take out the breathing tube. What I wasn't prepared for when they did that is how fast they really extract it, and then how sore I was going to be from that, and then that I could barely talk. So I sounded like 100-year-old smoker at that point when they pulled it out, and it hurt, and so it took a couple hours to calm down from all of that. But before that couple of hours occurred, I remember having this moment. I think it was shortly, really, after he took the tube out. I sat there for a moment staring at the ceiling. I'm still all kind of locked into the bed. And I just almost staring blankly around, and I went, "Oh my God, I'm alive." I mean, something in my head said, you came out of something that was really bad.
Yeah.
So I think a day later, no, forgive me. Let me step back a moment. Then after everything calmed down, I asked the physician, I said, how long had I been under? He goes, 3 days. And I went, 3 days? I thought normally people are 7 to 13. He goes, well, there's a story behind that. Okay, what happened? He said, we upped your cancer medication to full dose on the last 2 days. I said, how did that happen? He goes, your physicians from Boston got in touch with your hematologist here, and they came up with a plan because of research they're doing in Boston with the drug that they recently completed with mice that they injected COVID into. Oh, sorry. And they saw that the mice on the cancer drug lived through the COVID, and the ones who didn't get the cancer drug died.
So how did your doctor know that, or did they know that you were in the hospital with COVID-19?
The very first day, once I got settled into the ICU, I thought I better let them know.
Okay.
And I shot an email to them. What I didn't know is how much correspondence they were having with my local oncologist.
Wow.
So now the reason that I would only stayed on the ventilator 2 days is the cancer drug pushed back on the pneumonia in my lungs and the disease, the proteins in my lungs so hard that they pulled me off the ventilator after 3 days.
Wow, that's amazing.
Well, the story from there gets even better. I think 3 days after I recovered from that procedure, they've now moved me into a quote unquote regular room. And I think they're anticipating at some point in the near future, they're going to release me, because the turnaround on the infection in my lungs was so dramatic. They just didn't expect that. So I'm looking at my email and I see the day that they put me under, I got an email from both physicians in Boston that said, Robert, we need to talk to you right away. We're doing experimental testing with this drug. We need to get in touch with your local oncologist. Well, I didn't know that at the time because I was slightly in a coma. So I'm getting a call in my hospital room every day from my local oncologist, who can't even come into the room,
right?
Because they're not allowed to come into the room. And they were doing blood draws on me, I think 3 times a day during that period. And my numbers kept getting better and better and better and better. I am now, this duration from the time they put me under, or the second day they put me under on the ventilator, I'm on full dose of this drug. Now, if you recall, I said when I first got on that drug, within 30 days, it caused exceptional joint pain. But they saw the risk benefit worth it, given how much it was pushing back on the COVID. So let's see, they took me off on a Friday. The following Thursday, which was April 9th, they released me.
So let me look at my timeline here. So on April 9th, looks like 503,177 infected, 18,761 dead. And actually, I've got a note here that just before that, my neighbor found out she had the virus. She's, I believe, 18 weeks pregnant.
Oh, wow.
And She's had little to no symptoms. She's been exercising in the garage. We basically haven't seen them in, I think, 5 weeks now. We can talk about that later, but I think the timing is crazy and the experiences are crazy. So at that point, when you came out of the coma, how long was it before you were out?
So that was on a Sunday, and they released me on the following Thursday.
Okay.
But before they would release me, I had to have 2 days of being able to walk with a walker.
Wow.
And what I didn't realize at that time was how weak I was, and how much weight I had lost. And I remember the first time I looked in the mirror, my sideburns were all bushy. I don't grow a very good beard, nothing like yours, but I had as good a beard as I could have. And this was almost like down to here. It was crazy. And my eyes were almost like sunken into my head. I mean, I looked like a prisoner of war. I mean, I was horrified by looking at myself in the mirror. Yeah, I got released after I could prove I can walk on the walker, but I was not signing up for any marathons.
Yeah.
And the day I went home, a good friend of mine from church got me home, and my church family was just amazing. I go to a small church called Thrive Worship Center, and they had organized meals for me. They had come into my house and cleaned it before I got home.
Wow.
And they were constantly checking on me. And I mean, they're my family. And they were constantly praying for me through this. What I came to learn, that's a real important thing. I had clients who had their churches praying for me. I had friends that I didn't go to church with praying for me. My ex-wife had people all over the country praying for me. I'm certain I had at least a couple thousand people praying for me. So many of which I never knew of. I had friends posting on Facebook, and, I saw the posts on Facebook of how many people I'd never met who were praying for me. There's no question in my mind that I shouldn't be here talking to you, talking to anyone. God pulled me out of the ditch. The people who are dying from COVID are the elderly, people who have other health conditions that normally under normal circumstances aren't good for you. But I have a cancer that's a immune deficiency problem. And my immune system was so weak, I should not have made it. But so here's the big God story in this. Remember, I went to get I said in January, I went and saw my doctors in Boston because my cancer was getting bad. Then I went to Mayo Clinic. They both came up with the same conclusion for treatment, but none of them talked about taking my current cancer drug and boosting it to full dose. So this is where I saw God take a horrible situation in my life, COVID, and used another horrible situation in my life, cancer, and used them together to get me out of the hospital quickly. That's not the end of the good part of the story.
Good.
So I've been home now for 4 weeks, and I progressively, during those 4 weeks, I've been getting stronger, healthier. I've started to exercise again. My lungs are still damaged, and it's going to take several weeks, I think, still, for them to get to full capacity again. But I'm doing chores around the house. I'm living a relatively normal, healthy life. I had to get two consecutive negative COVID tests before I was allowed to go back and see my local oncologist. I had that last Monday was the second of the two. Was that me? Sorry.
That's fine.
Friday of last week, I had all my blood draws for my cancer. There's a particular one that we watch the closest for the cancer marker, which is, this is called IgM. We all have it in our body. In normal range, you, as a normal person, have it in a range of 40 to 230 parts per milliliter.
Right.
Mine in January was 2,035. So the magnitude of order there is pretty significant. So from the time they started me on full dose at the hospital on my cancer drug, which I shouldn't be taking because it causes too much pain in me, to last Friday is 4 weeks. Got my IgM number Tuesday. Got called by my oncologist. They normally don't call. They usually just post it into what's called My Chart, which is an online portal, medical portal. He was so excited. He called me up. He goes, got your IgM number? I'm like, okay. I expected it to come down a little bit because now I'm on full dose. Your number is 1,075. So it cut in half the amount of IgM in 1 month of being on full dose of that drug. Now, I was not supposed to be on that drug. As a matter of fact, they were going to take me off of it.
Right.
So do you see what I'm saying here? Is
Totally.
I've got this one horrible situation going on. I've got cancer going on, and God worked it out.
Yeah.
Now, the cancer isn't completely gone, but I'm 4 weeks out of COVID. If you didn't know I had COVID 4 weeks ago, would you guess that?
No way.
I have cancer.
Yeah.
Would you guess that looking at me?
Well, I mean, I have to say, man, you've been an encouragement to me in my life, just as a friend, as a fellow Mac fan. You know, we banter about that stuff as well. And I always said, you know, and I've told several people there's like 5 stances people take on this COVID thing. Some people are super scared, and some people think it's a big conspiracy, and there's everybody in between. And a friend of mine wrote that article, and I've kind of taken that as my own to understand, you know, where people sit and the, you know, either way. But regardless, I always thought, you know, it'll be different when it's close to home. You know, it's easy to say, you look at these numbers and a statistic, but it's a little bit different when it's somebody you know that has it. And so I'm super happy to have you sitting here, and, you know, I mean, I can't imagine. When I saw your post, Kim actually told me about it. She said, Robert was in the hospital with COVID. And I'm like, what? So I pulled up Facebook, I read it, and my first instinct was, I mean, I want to call and talk to you, but I was like, he's probably getting bombarded. So I think I gave it a day or two, and I called you and said, I wanted to check on you. But I'm just happy to have you here, and I think it's a true miracle. I keep going back to what you said, which is the one bad thing ended up helping you with another bad thing, and every day is a blessing. And to be able to go through that, I really thought it was important for you to come and share your experience for other people, because it's confusing right now. People don't know what to think. Is it overblown? Is it a conspiracy? Is it the zombie virus that's going to kill us all? We just don't know. And I think the doctors are trying to figure it out. I mean, we're seeing more and more data come out. Like I said, right about the same time, we discover my neighbor has it. And it's honestly more of just a pestering frustration for them, that they're like, well, we're going back. And I remember when they said, we're going to go get a test and she'll test negative. No, we can kind of go back to normal again. Still positive after 4 weeks. And who knows how long she had it before then. And she's pregnant, but she feels great. They're exercising in the garage. She works at home. He works at home. But I just thought, wow, to see the two different stories and that drastic. Now, of course, I think it's important for people to see too. You would be considered high risk, but the numbers, I still don't know if we know what this is going to be like. Maybe we will never know exactly how many people were killed by the virus, or they had other symptoms and it just pushed them over the edge, or people that had it and never even had a cough. And I think I've told people before, I was actually in Florida. I think I told you this on the phone too. I was in Florida. I was with some guys at a big airline, and I'm convinced that I've had it. Part of the confusion, I think, for just I would say a common person like me is, well, can I go get a test? Or where do I go to get a test? Or are the antibody tests ready? Could I go get it? Would that even matter? Will my plasma help other people? I don't know. Those are questions I think that still need to be discovered for the future, for knowledge. But I do know that same neighbor, when they went back to get tested, they asked those questions. The husband who took his wife over there said, should I get a test? I mean, I've been living with this, clearly somebody who's tested positive. Do I have it? And at that time, the nurse said, there have been a lot of people coming back where mom's got the virus, so they rushed the whole family over here. We swab them all, and no one's positive. They're seeing more and more of that, which is counterintuitive that it's highly contagious. It's just hard to know what to think. And actually, my neighbor was on the news as well, the local news, because they were advised, if you feel okay and you don't have symptoms, give it 2 or 3 days and go back to life as normal. And that was sort of in the heat of this thing where we don't really know. So I enjoyed hearing your story, and I hope that other people can listen and say, okay, I want to try to get this podcast out soon while we're still learning, so that people can hear what you went through. I think it's interesting. From the way you're telling it, the ventilator seemed like an interesting piece to me. Like, I thought it was, I still think it's interesting that they tried to push you to, hey, you got to do this right now. I mean, it's never a good decision to think about something right now. Hey, call your brother, figure it out, sign your will. I mean, there's not many times in a person's life, if ever, that they're asked to immediately call your loved ones, sign your will, and then we're going to put you under, and best of luck to you. I mean, that's not a situation that anybody wants to be put in ever. And to hear that you had to go through that is just, it's just a miracle that you're here. It really is. And seeing, and I wanted to bring up something. You didn't say this as we were talking. You said it on the phone to me the other day about the psychological. I think you said that for how many ever 17 days you were there, you didn't see anything but gloves and masks. And I think that's important too, because I've seen memes and stuff where doctors are putting pictures of themselves smiling on their, a printout of them on their gown. But I mean, what an experience, man. I'm glad to have you here. Thanks for coming and telling us your story. And I'm thankful for you and just the inspiration you've been to me and hopefully to others in all aspects. So, what's next? Are you gonna talk to more people about it? Are you gonna go back to Boston and get more studies done? What's next for you with this situation?
Well, I've decided for myself, and I'm not saying this is appropriate for everyone else, but for myself, I'm choosing not to fly until there's a vaccine.
Okay.
I still have cancer. So what they don't know about this virus yet, and you've touched a little bit on antibodies, is we don't even know, or the physicians, the scientists don't know yet, even if you have the antibodies, if that means you are not able to get the virus again.
Right.
And as I'm being told, they really won't have a handle on that specifically for at least a year.
Sure.
I think a vaccine will be out well before that. And I'm encouraged by hearing some of the reports that I have been hearing lately, but I just can't risk it. I mean, I came as close as somebody could come to dying, and I'm not interested in doing that again.
Right.
And, even to the point of we don't know how easy it is or not to get this. I'm a sole proprietor architect, as you know. I work out of my house. I don't have a lot of daily interaction with people other than my clients or church and neighbors. But I just, at the time that I got sick, my level of interaction really came at the airport. That's where I think I contracted this, was going through the airports. So right now, airports are not a happy place for me, So,
well, what would you say to other people? I mean, do you, and I know right now it's all opinion. It's going to be my opinion, your opinion. But in your opinion, should we still be on lockdown? Should it be, going back to that sort of 5-step scale, should it be that high risk people need to kind of stay away and other people go about their business? Being in the throes of it, what's your feeling about how we're handling it and going back? Do you feel comfortable with that? Or for other people's sake, do you feel comfortable? How do you feel about that?
So, I freely admit I have a strong bias given what I went through. And by no stretch of the imagination do I have the knowledge that the scientists that are studying this. But what I do know is I got it in a very quick period of time by being out and about, meaning through the airports. It deeply concerns me hearing not only that all the states are opening up so quickly, but what's even more concerning is seeing citizens rebel against the government on this, making claims of we're taking away your rights and your liberties. And from my perspective, every human should not only be concerned about themselves getting the disease, but how many people can you potentially share that virus with unknowingly? So I'm really troubled by what I'm hearing about everything opening up, and I've told this to a few people. I hope, I pray I am wrong, but if things keep going the way they're going right now, my prediction is by the end of June we're going to see a huge spike again. Again, I hope I'm wrong. And my concern really comes out of I would not want a single person whether I knew them or not, to go through what I just went through.
Yeah.
So I'm really troubled. I wish people would have more patience. I guess in some ways, living through cancer for almost a decade now, I've built some patience
Yeah.
for unfavorable conditions. And I'm not saying I would want that for anyone else,
Right.
but I think we need to really take a deep breath and recognize our government is not purposely trying to take away your rights. I truly believe, whether they're handling it correctly or not, I really believe the bottom line is they don't want people dying. And you know, it's horrifying to see citizens walking up on Capitol steps with machine guns, and you know, what are you going to do? You know, what do you intend to do with your weaponry? And by the way, I have nothing against guns. I think anyone who's qualified to have one, licensed to have one, should have one. But you know, acting as though you're going to war makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I think the tough part is the unknown for us, because we don't know how bad it actually is. We don't know how many people had it. Like, if I did have it and I gave it to Kim and I gave it to my neighbors and I gave it to my friends, and we've all been through it, and we find out that a majority of the population has already had it. I personally, and again, like going back to those 5 steps, everybody's kind of got their opinion. And I knew, especially with you going through it, you're going to have a bias, because, I mean, I didn't go through that, you know. But I look at the job loss, the pain and suffering that's about to come, and I worry about that almost more than the virus, because it's like, man, there's so many people that work in restaurants and you know, neighbors and stuff that own hair salons, and they just can't make a living, and it's like almost years and years worth of damage possibly. I think we have yet to see what that's going to be. Divorce rates and abuse and all this stuff. Who knows? I don't know if we'll ever see get a real good grip for what this has done to not only the death toll of the people who had the virus, or just the story from you. It's just, I mean, it's horrifying. I can't imagine what I would do stuck in that place for those many days. But yeah, I just don't think we know. And people are just trying to figure it out. I mean, there's people, as far as the rights go, it's hard to know where to stand. I mean, when you have a place like Costco say, you can't come in our store unless you're wearing a mask. And then you hear doctors say, well, a mask doesn't really even help you. And I go into the grocery store to get food, and I see, you know, the kid wearing gloves that he just touched everything that the other guy picked up. And it's almost like, so you just have infected gloves now. What's the point? I think it's yet to be seen. And people are just lashing out, I feel like, with just feelings. You know, they're upset. People have lost jobs. People have had people die in their families. So it's just a lot of suffering, and it's hard to know. But hopefully, you know, people talk about it as if it's going to end soon. Everybody's like, well, when this is over. And I actually heard Dan Crenshaw talk about, at some point we need to look at it from instead of a defensive, like, okay, let's retreat and get our troops together and figure out what's going on. And now we have to attack. We got to kind of turn around and say, all right, how are we going to handle this? Because we have to continue moving forward. People have to work and so on. But from what you saw, did you feel like the hospital was ill-equipped? Did they not have equipment? From your insider perspective, what did that seem like to you? Did they seem like they had everything at that point in time?
You know, for the most part, I think they were very well equipped. They didn't seem to have shortages of masks or gowns or so forth. I would say the only challenge was, you know, when you go into a hospital, don't expect to sleep, especially if you have something significant going on. You know, in my case, I think I had at well over 150 either blood draws or punctures for IVs or whatnot. So I'm being woken up constantly. There was a difference in care between daytime care and middle of the night care. That was a little challenging at times. But overall, I think they did a terrific job trying to help me get out of there as quickly as possible. To the point that when they finally started making it sound like they would release me, now I was really itchy to get out. And they were not quick to let me out because they wanted to make sure I was able to function on my own.
Yeah.
You know, I want to step back for a minute on some of the things you talked about relative to all the variables and how certain stores handle certain things, and you even talked about restaurants. So yesterday, for the first time in 4 weeks being home, on the heels of me having successful online architectural approval on one of my projects with a town council, I decided I was going to get crazy and treat myself to a cheeseburger. I went to a local, well-known chain in town.
Yep.
And they're all over the country. It's not the one you would probably think.
Sure.
But on the glass, the storefront, they had their phone number written on the glass saying, call your order in before you come in. I thought, well, that's a good process. They're trying to protect their customers, not staying inside very long. So I called the order in. I'm sitting in my car. And in the meantime, I'm watching several customers go in and out, not one with gloves or mask on. And I thought, okay, that's kind of bothered me. Again, I freely admit I have the bias of I'm going to be as careful as possible. But then the real troubling thing happened. I walked in, there were 4 employees. They're behind, they have now put up, you know, the glass barriers so you're not sneezing on each other. The guy at the cashier has a mask on that's sitting well below his nose.
Right.
I'm like, well, that's only solving half the problem there.
Yeah.
Then there's 3 food prep people, one handling the fries, one making the burgers, and one on the grill. Not a single food prep person had masks on. Now, I know it's not the law, but I'm going to contrast that with another restaurant chain afterwards. I asked the guy who came up to the counter to me, I go, are you not preparing my food with masks on? And he goes, no, we don't really need them. I said, okay, you're the wrong guy to talk to. Can I talk to the manager? And the lady at the grill turns around and I said, aren't you guys concerned about prepping food and you're all breathing over the food here? She goes, not really. And she literally shrugged her shoulders and then turned her back on me. I said, you know what, guys? Thank you, but no thank you. I'm not going to take my order. And I walked out. I went up the street and there was a Chick-fil-A open.
Of course.
So I rolled in there. They're only doing drive-thrus. As soon as I got into the drive-thru line, the young lady there taking orders has full mask on, full gloves. She's taking the order on a pen tablet. Then she asks for payment. She doesn't reach for my credit card. She puts the machine toward me
with like a selfie stick.
No, not even a selfie stick, but there's a slot in there for the credit card. She's like, swipe your own card.
Okay.
So she doesn't even want to touch my card. I'm good with that. Roll around the corner to pick up my food. Normally you go up to slide up window. Either they're reaching out or you're kind of reaching in the window. They're not doing that. I could see every employee in the restaurant has masks and gloves on. But Now there's an employee standing outside the drive-up window. He's got this like tray, a tall tray, that he walks up to the window, doesn't stick his hands in the window, goes right up to the window. The lady in the window puts the bag and the cup into the basket. He never handles the food. He turns around, he walks up to me, he asks me to grab my food out of the basket. Okay. I don't mean to be a commercial, and I'm not a stockholder of Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, this podcast is sponsored by Chick-fil-A.
There you go. But I'm thinking,
it's great customer service.
Great customer service. They understand the severity of what's going on. And now there's this other restaurant who does it.
Well, and going back to that, the 5 levels of how you interpret COVID is what
Interesting that you said 5.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is an interesting. No commonality there. But the point of that article was to say, look, no matter where somebody is, we don't know enough to say anything otherwise. So let's just be kind to each other. And it's no secret, every time I talk to people on the podcast about business or whatever, we talk about business culture and things. And I think Chick-fil-A, Starbucks, some of those places, I mean, they're always going to try their best to make every customer feel comfortable. More than likely, no matter your stance, you're probably going to say, oh, nice. On any other day, if they're wearing gloves and masks and washing their hands, you'd think, wow, that's really good. Because any other day, any other year, you really don't want people handling your food with their hands and, wiping their nose on their sleeve and stuff that we've seen. It's gross as it is. And I think, through this whole thing, I'm like, where are all these people that don't wash their hands? Oh my gosh. But it's definitely going to change society, culture, restaurants, no matter what we do. It's going to put an imprint on everything from here forward.
So I've gotten to go to the grocery store a couple times since I've been home, and I'm doing probably what a lot of people are doing. Every package is getting wiped off when you bring it home, right? And that got me to thinking, I'm not sure how comfortable I am going in restaurants right now. I'm not saying that's going to change in the future, but right now, I can't see my food being prepared.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the person who's preparing the food is taking the same care as if they were giving it to their child.
Yeah.
Or their elderly mother.
Yeah.
And what I saw last night at that burger place, I mean, it was scary for me.
Yeah.
Now, clearly the 3 customers who walked in before me weren't too worried about it.
Yeah, and I'm no doctor, but again, time will tell. I'm thankful for the people that do work on the front lines. I know some people in my small group work intaking people at the hospitals, and they seem to feel like it's mostly older folks, people with bad conditions, and so maybe time will tell, and we'll get back to normalcy. But I don't know if I don't know if I've shaken a hand in 3 months. I mean, it's just weird. Meetings are very weird. They're going to continue to be weird where there's no shaking hands, and there's going to be people that continue to wear masks. But the thing for me, and I don't know if this will ever be solved, but it's just the confusion on the data. Should we wear a mask? Should we not? Should we wear gloves? Should we not? Is it that bad? Is it not? I just don't know anymore. So I think we'll just have to collect more data. And I think that's why I wanted to bring up that calendar, is that it's been such a short period of time in just the span of life that we don't know anything yet. We haven't had enough time for the doctors and stuff to figure it out. But that, again, I'm glad you were able to come on and tell your story, because I think it's important. People want to know. Actually, I was on a Zoom call this morning, and I was asked by 2 people, do you know anybody who's had the virus? And I said, actually, I know 2 people, and they have 2 totally different stories. But there's a lot of people in the Charlotte area that they still have never met anybody who's had it, and I guess that's a good thing. But yeah, we'll see. So Well, man, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate you, all that you mean to me, and thanks for sharing your story. So, again, I'm Chad Keith with Overcoming Average. So, my company, Atlas Technology Solutions, is the sponsor of the podcast. So, I think Robert would agree that Macs are the best. So, get a Mac for your business, and let me help you make it run really well. So, thanks, and Robert, we'll have to have you out again sometime soon, talk about your business and something more positive. This was positive, but something other than coronavirus. So,
Chad, thank you so much for the opportunity to sit here and talk with you. And there is one thing that I absolutely want to be my takeaway for others is prayer works.
Absolutely.
And God heard these prayers.
He did, and you're an answer to prayer sitting here in front of us. So
thanks, buddy.
thanks, man. Have a good one.
You too.